times have you heard that to master a musical instrument, you need to practice very slowly? You've probably also heard that if you want to ever play fast, you need to start really slowly and then gradually increase your tempo, of course, until you reach your goal. Now, after over 20 years of playing and teaching professionally, I've tried basically every single slow and fast strategy out there, and I've discovered some benefits and some drawbacks to each of these. In this video, I'm going to show you why relying too much on slow practice creates major problems in your playing, and I want to show you how you can balance slow and fast practice the right way to achieve literally faster results. Now, teachers everywhere, including myself, to be honest, tell their students to practice very slowly all the time, and that's because slow practice is undeniably important and necessary for us to improve. And this is especially true when we learn new material. Slow practice allows us to be hyper aware of everything about our playing, like for example, our fingerings, our articulation, dynamics, rhythm, etc. I like to think of it kind of like practicing under a microscope. When I learn new material, for example, and I've learned it very slowly at first, I find that I'm able to memorize and play everything correctly much sooner than if I don't engage in slow practice first. I've also found that very slow practice is also really great for error correction, and this is particularly true when errors are persistent, meaning they just don't seem to improve no matter what we do. The analogy I like to think of for this is kind of like hitting a nail with a hammer and then you accidentally whacked your thumb. Usually the first thing you do, hopefully, is to stop hammering, and then you aim again and you start slowly again before you start hitting that nail faster and harder. Even if that slow practice, that slow setup is just for a moment. In music practice, the concept is really similar. Now, obviously, playing a musical instrument is significantly more complex than hitting a nail with a hammer, but hopefully you get the idea. Slowing down significantly after repeated errors helps us isolate and improve our trouble spots much more efficiently than not slowing down in general. Now, there are some exceptions to this. This is especially true when you get to higher levels, but for most beginner and early intermediate students, I found that super slow practice for error correction is generally the most effective option. So the question is, how slow exactly is super slow practice? Well, I think the answer is ultimately relative. It depends on your current level of experience. But as a reference, we can think of it as somewhere between maybe quarter note at 40 beats per minute to 60 beats per minute, where you're playing straight quarter notes or you're playing eighth notes. And I want to show you what that sounds like. So here's my metronome at 60 beats per minute. Right, so 1, 2, and you're playing quarter notes. Right, your quarter notes would be like that, right with the click. Or you're playing eighth notes, which would be 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and, right? If you lower this to 40, it's very slow. Here's your quarter notes, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's hard to do. And your eighth notes are going to be 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And so it's very, very slow practice. Now, even though super slow practice can be tremendously helpful, it also has some really big limitations that we definitely need to talk about. Performance psychologist Noah Kageyama cites two really fascinating studies on his website, which is bulletproofmusician.com. I'll have a link to the main article that he writes where he cites these two studies in the description below, so definitely make sure to check that out. His website is awesome in general, so it'll be a good resource for all of you who are super interested in this kind of thing. In any case, the first study that Kageyama cites in his article is a paper by Belkin and Elliott. You see the graphic on the screen. And in this study, the researchers tested two groups of kids on speed and accuracy by having kids hit a ball with a floor hockey stick. Now, to make sure everything was fair, none of the kids had any prior hockey experience. And then to get everyone on the same page, the research team taught both groups of kids how to hold a hockey stick and then, of course, how to stand. After that, each group was ready to go, and then they were each given a different task. Group 1 was the accuracy group, and they were told to aim for a target on a wall that was 25 feet away from them. After each shot, the kids were told their accuracy scores, in other words, how far their shot was from the target, and then they were told to try to improve their accuracy on every next shot. Group 2 was the speed group, and they were just given a wall 25 feet away, and they were just told to hit the ball as hard and as fast as they could at the wall, no target. After each shot, the kids were then given their speed score in miles per hour, and then they were told to try to shoot even harder and even faster. After 2 days, I think this is pretty obvious, the accuracy group got better at accuracy and the speed group got faster. But there was a third day where both groups were tested both on accuracy and speed combined. And the researchers told both groups to not prioritize one over the other, that the test was really on the combination of speed and accuracy, so they were to hit as fast as they could and be as accurate as they could. And what the researchers found was that the speed group scored just as accurately as the accuracy group, but they did so at twice the speed. I think that was pretty fascinating. Before we talk about what all that means, I also want to talk about the second study that Kageyama cites on his website. It was also a speed versus accuracy study, and in this case, researchers had two groups of kids throwing softballs, and to be totally precise, they were fastballs. And in this study, similar to the previous one that I talked about, the researchers divided the kids into two groups. One was a speed group and the other one was an accuracy group. But this study was a little bit different. They actually had both groups switch their task midway through. So the group that started with accuracy switched to only speed, so no accuracy, partway through their 6 weeks, and the speed group switched to just accuracy partway through their training as well. What the researchers found at the end of this study, the group that started with accuracy and ended with speed did significantly worse on accuracy and speed combined than the group that started with speed and ended with accuracy. So this is, I think, much more fascinating, and what Kageyama says on his website is that this generally suggests that if we start with too much precise practice, slow practice, it could even mess us up when we switch to fast practice later on. But I want to note two important differences between what we're talking about in the studies here and the kind of music practice that most of us do pretty much at every level, especially as beginner and intermediate students. So in these studies, we had two kinds of speeds, right? We had just slow and just fast. There was no in between. And I think that's a huge difference between how most of us practice. We have a range. If we start, beginner and intermediate students usually start with slow practice, and here's fast practice here, and we get faster and faster and faster and faster until we finally get to our ultimate goal tempo, which is super fast. Now, I mentioned already that there are some exceptions to this. When you have a higher level of expertise, a lot of musicians that I know, myself as well, will start at a goal tempo and then work down. But we'll talk about that later. For the purposes of this video, let's focus primarily on beginner and intermediate students who usually go from slow to fast. Now, in any case, the studies that we're talking about and the normal common practice when we go to slow to fast, if we spend too much time on slow practice, the slow practice has these limitations that I talked about. The first limitation is that with too much slow practice, especially very slow practice, we just don't engage the right muscle groups or all of the muscle groups and even the right neural pathways that are needed for fast movement. It's just too much slow practice is inefficient, and it's not really representative of what the music, what our hands, fingers, vocal cords, arms, whatever instrument you're playing, of what those are going to feel like when we actually play fast. Now, I want to show you an example. At the beginning of this video, I played this fairly fast arpeggio. I want to show you what that looks like at slow tempos versus fast tempos. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to make sure that my right hand movements at the slow tempo are just as big or small as they are at the fast tempo. So I'm going to try to really mimic that. But what you can see happening, let's say if I played this at 60 beats per minute, where each note is a quarter note. It's very slow. So right, you can see my fingers, they have too much time to go back to their starting point. When we practice fast, that doesn't happen. Our fingers, even though they can relax as much as possible, there's just not enough time for them to go back to their starting point. So right, you can see they're relaxed. I'm certainly not feeling tension, but there's not enough time for them to go all the way back to their starting point. And I think that's a big, really important point and really important difference between slow practice and fast practice. The second limitation of super slow practice has more to do with a big picture awareness of our musical expression. When we play a phrase of music very slowly, it's really difficult to hear how the expressive shape of our music is going to sound through longer sections of music. And I really feel strongly that this can negatively affect our ability to express our music the way we want when we play it at a performance tempo. Slow practice is really great for maybe practicing a wide expressive range, and maybe even to experiment a little bit, possibly to get an idea of what the music could sound like at faster tempos. But to really hear and feel the music the way we want, we need to get away from practicing under a microscope, in other words, super slow practice, and really start hitting the gas a lot sooner than most of us usually do. Personally, I think we should limit our use of slow practice to two general moments in our music journey, and those are going to be the learning moments and correcting moments. And if we do go back to slow practice, then I think we should only do so for really short amounts of time and only when needed. Remember that when we shift to fast practice, like I mentioned already, we're going to be engaging more muscle groups that are necessary for faster movement, and we're going to be able to get a better sort of big picture idea of what the music is going to sound like in terms of our expression. Another really great benefit to fast practice is that it helps us uncover mistakes that just do not show up when we practice super slowly. Now, once we discover those errors, we can work on correcting them at faster tempos, and when errors are persistent, at slower tempos, and maybe even super slow tempos. But we have to be careful with fast practice. It's not all perfect, just like slow practice is not all perfect. If we do too much fast practice, then, especially if we do it incorrectly, we're just going to end up accumulating a whole bunch of errors and possibly a lot of tension, and those are going to quickly turn into bad practice habits, which will end up in us sounding bad and just not feeling very good about our playing. So the key is to know when and how to use each method, slow and fast. And here's a balance for both that I found works for most people. Again, I think it's generally a good idea to start learning any new material very, very slowly. And when you are in the learning phase, think of that as including fingering, memorization, articulation, expression, just general mechanics. And then, of course, you can also include super slow practice in the correction phase, especially for persistent errors. Those are errors that I typically feel occur more than twice and that you usually cannot resolve at faster tempos. But once you can play a musical phrase correctly from memory, you've addressed all your errors and you're staying relaxed, then I think we should immediately start hitting the gas a bit to test things out at higher speeds. Now, again, just to be clear, I'm not saying we should go from really slow practice all of a sudden to a performance tempo in one shot. All I'm saying is that we can and should work up our tempo pretty quickly in the same practice session. And then we should increase our tempo until we hit our threshold, which is where errors and tension start to occur. Now, once we reach that threshold, then the next step is going to be to work on correcting our mistakes and eliminating our tension first at our fast tempo. So again, first at the fast tempo. Even if it's just for a few seconds. And then if we're not successful, we can slow down as much as needed until we are successful. The next step is going to be to repeat the corrections and then work on increasing our tempo again. So it ends up being sort of this toggling thing where you learn the material slowly, you get it right, then you hit the gas a little bit till you reach your threshold, then you come down to correct, go back up, hit your threshold. Little by little, that threshold starts increasing as long as you're staying relaxed and you're being really deliberate, really specific about your practice. Now, once you can play all of your material at or near your performance tempo, generally I find that practicing at several different speeds is really key. Think of it like maybe you can practice at a medium tempo, at your performance goal tempo, and then even a little bit faster than your performance tempo. I feel like that really helps solidify all of the mechanics and all of the nuances in the music. Because if you think of it, if you want to perform a piece of music maybe at 100 beats per minute, I know that's fairly slow, but let's say 100 beats per minute, you want to be able to practice it at home at about 110 or 120 so that when you do go and perform it for anybody, the nerves that are going to exist in that performance situation don't just make it impossible for you to play, right? So practicing at home at a faster tempo, a little bit faster than your goal, is always a good idea. Now, personally, with all of those changes in tempo, I still avoid going back to that super slow tempo because I just don't find it very useful. But everyone is different, so if you do find it useful to go back to super slow practice, then you should definitely do it. But I would encourage you to spend a little bit of time in that super slow practice and then mix in a lot more faster practice too. Otherwise, it's very likely that you're going to get stuck in your progress where you're very far from reaching your goal tempo and you just can't play any faster. Now, we've talked about how to balance slow and fast practice for best results, but what about building speed in general? I hinted at a couple of strategies earlier in this video, but there are quite a few more out there, and if you want to learn which ones I think are the most effective, make sure to check out the next video on the screen where I break down 3 extremely effective practice strategies used by pros, plus 1 strategy that everyone uses, but everyone should also avoid like the plague. See you over there.